All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. This morning, we are going to study Psalm 44. Psalm 44 is another psalm from the group of psalms written by the sons of Korach or attributed to the sons of Korach. Korach, of course, is an important character in the rebellion against Moses in the book of Numbers. In fact, there's a whole parsha named after Korach. Uh, Korach is Moses's first cousin, a Levite, from a different family of Levites than the ruling family of Levites. And uh, his claim is the whole nation is holy. Why should Moses and Aaron be elevated above everybody else? But his complaint, while it sounds reasonable, it seems to come with a um with a lust for power, right? It's not really about everybody should be equal. It's that he should be the leader. Why why should this tribe of Levites, why this family of Levites from Amram be Moses and Aaron's father? Why should they be elevated more than Korach's family, who was the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kehat, right? So why not the Kehat family instead of the family of Amram? So um, I maybe suggested last week, but I'm just going to expand a little bit more. From a biblical critical perspective, one possible way to understand this story is that it isn't actually relating to a rebellion that occurred in the time of the desert at all, but that the story of the rebellion in the time of the desert was written as a political polemic between two differing Levitical groups who were each in the time of the Second Temple or the time of the First Temple struggling for political dominance and leadership. We know that this is the case from a historical critical perspective, or we think it's the case, and in fact, we know that the that one uh, group of Levites ends up writing the Deuteronomic school from Tanakh. That is the book of Deuteronomy and several of the historical books that are connected to the book of Deuteronomy. And one of the Levitical schools ends up writing so that's the D source in biblical critical thought, J, E, P, and D, right? And one of the Levitical groups ends up writing the priestly source, what is called P. They are the Kohanim HaLeviim versus the Leviim, right? So there are different ways that the Bible describes these Levitical tribes. And it is possibly the case that the story of Korach is written in to the narrative of going out from Egypt and being in the desert in the wilderness to make this political point that a certain tribe is uh, greater than or less than another tribe of Levites. And clearly, they didn't see eye to eye on certain kinds of political issues, spiritual issues, right? And when you actually read the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, they actually disagree fundamentally on the nature of God. They have a different theology. But what they agree on is that God is in relationship with the Jewish people. That relationship is a covenantal relationship, and that covenant comes with laws and obligations and responsibilities of both sides, right? So there are a lot of things, right? And that God reveals God's self to the people. Now, the book of Deuteronomy is much more into an auditory revelation. God reveals God's self to the Jewish people only through voice. God's image is never seen. The book of Leviticus describes a much more physical, visual revelation where God appears in a cloud and God's physical substance is, in fact, uh, revealed, visible to the Jewish people. So that's one example of this legal difference, of this theological difference. Why do I bring this up? I bring this up because if you just read the book of Leviticus, sorry, the book of Numbers, if you just read the story of the destruction of Korach and his entire Edah, his entire faction among the Jewish people, you would be shocked to then find Psalms attributed to Korach's children, or to like the house of Korach, that are preserved in the book of Psalms. But if you instead said, there's a long tradition of Korachite Levites, some of whom are great poets, and ultimately the Korachite Levites lose out the political fight, and then this story gets written about how they were rebellious from the start, right? That would explain why the Psalms that were written by that group still made it into the book of Psalms. It's because these things were codified at different times and for different political reasons. Now, the traditional approach is, as I said last week, I think, that, to talk about the redemptive power of relationship with God, that even though they were swallowed up by the earth with their father Korach, a a ledge like came up from Gehinnom and held them sort of suspended, in underneath the earth, but not descended into the pit, where they sit and play their lyres and write these poems.
Wow.
Uh, the idea is that like song can be redemptive. And I think that's also a powerful read, right? That traditional approach gives us a real powerful message. Uh, but it uh, but it does um, it does come from the tradition that says no, 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 this like historically happened. Korach and his tribe were all swallowed up by the earth, and there they are. And we nonetheless have these psalms because of miraculous intervention. Now, I don't know, right? When we were doing the David Psalms at the beginning of the book, that is the first book of Psalms, of the book of Psalms, that first book has a lot of direct references um uh to moments in David's life. I don't know, and I couldn't find any references where people were like, you have to read this psalm cognizant of the like this event in Korach's life that his children are responding to. And yet, the tone of this psalm and the tone of some of the other Korach psalms is very much responding to uh, the acts of destruction of the Jewish people, very much responding to calamity. They are psalms of lament, right? And we looked at Psalm 42, 43, which is, we talked about how that was really one psalm. And that Psalm 42 section of it, very much was a psalm of lament. And the Psalm 43 section of that psalm was a psalm that asked for a particular response to that lament. Uh, Psalm 44, we're going to be back in that genre of psalms of lament, and so we're we're going to I think it may be helpful to at least wonder what the association of Korach's sons has to do with this psalm. I don't know whether it's that meaningful or not, but it is interesting that that is our that is the way this psalm begins by referencing that particular story in the book of Numbers. So we'll jump in. I'm going to read the psalm in Hebrew and then also in translation. And we'll start by asking the question, what emotional resonance does this psalm have? Like in what context might you use it? And so here we go. Lamenatzeach livnei Korach maskil. Elohim be'oznenu shamanu avotenu sipru lanu. Be'oznenu shamanu avotenu sipru lanu. Po'al pa'alta bimehem bimei kedem. Ata yadcha goyim horashta vatitaem tara leumim vatishalchem. Ki lo v'chartem yarshu eretz uzro'am lo hoshia lamo ki yamincha uzro'acha ve'or panecha ki ritzitam. Atahu malki Elohim tzaveh Yeshuot Yaakov. B'cha tzarenu ninageach b'shimcha navus kamenu. Ki lo v'kashti evtach v'charbi lo toshieni. Ki hoshatanu mitzarenu umisanenu hevishvota. Heavy shota. Be'Elohim hilalnu kol hayom v'shimcha leolam nodeh sela. Af zanachta v'tachlimenu v'lo teitzei b'tzivotenu. Tishivenu achor minitzar umisanenu shasu lamo. Titnenu kitzon machal uvagoyim zeritanu. Timkor amcha below hon below rabita bimchirehem. Tisimenu cherpa lishchenenu laag vakeles lisvivotenu. Tisimenu mashal bagoyim menod rosh balumim. Kol hayom kilimati negdi uvoshet panai kisatni. Mikol mecharef umegadef mipnei oyev umitnakem. Kol zot ba'atnu velo shechachanucha velo shikarnu bivritecha. Lo nasog achor libenu vatet ashurenu mini orchecha. Im shachachnu shem Eloheinu v'nifros kapenu le'elzar. Halo Elohim yachakor zot Ki hu yodea ta'alumot lev. Ki alecha horagnu kol hayom nechshavnu kitzon tivcha. Ura lama tishan Adonai hakitza al tiznach lanetzach. Lama panecha tastir tishkach onyenu v'lachatzenu. Ki shacha la'afar nafshenu dovka la'aretz bitnenu. Kuma ezrata lanu ufdenu laman chasdecha. For the leader of the Korachites, a maskil. We have heard, O God, our ancestors have told us the deeds you performed in their time in days of old. With your hand you planted them, displacing nations. You brought misfortune on peoples and drove them out. It was not by their sword that they took the land. Their arm did not give them victory, but your right hand, your arm, and your good will, for you favored them. You are my king, O God, decreed victories for Jacob. Through you we gore our foes, by your name we trample our adversaries. I do not trust in my bow, it is not my sword that gives me victory. You give us victory over our foes. You thwart those who hate us. In God we glory at all times and praise your name unceasingly. Selah. Yet you have rejected and disgraced us. You do not go with our armies. You make us retreat before our foe. Our enemies plunder us at will. You let them devour us like sheep. You disperse us among the nations. You sell your people for no fortune. You set no high price on them. You make us the butt of our neighbors, the scorn and derision of those around us. You make us a byword among the nations, a laughingstock among the peoples. I am always aware of my disgrace. I am wholly covered with shame at the sound of taunting revilers in the presence of the vengeful foe. All this has come upon us, yet we have not forgotten you, or been false to your covenant. Our hearts have not gone astray, nor have our feet swerved from your path, though you cast us crushed to where the sea monster is and covered us over with the deepest darkness. If we forgot the name of our God and spread forth our hands to a foreign God, God would surely search it out as the one who knows the secrets of the heart. It is for your sake that we are slain all day long, that we are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. Rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O my sovereign? Awaken. Do not reject us forever. Why do you hide your face, ignoring our affliction and distress? We lie prostrate in the dust. Our body clings to the ground. Arise and help us. Redeem us as befits your faithfulness. I'll read one more translation. From Rabbi Richard Levy, for the conductor of the sons of Korach a maskil. O God, through our ears we have heard, our ancestors told us stories, a work you worked in their days, in days of old. Your own hand dispossessed peoples and replanted them. You broke up nations and sent them abroad. For not with their sword would they possess the land, nor did their arm deliver them, but your right hand and your arm and the light of your countenance, for you desired them. You are the one who is my majesty. Command the deliverance of Jacob. Through you we will grind down our oppressors. Through your name we will trample those who rise against us. For not in my bow do I trust, and my sword will not deliver me. For you have delivered me from my oppressors, and those who hate us you have put to shame. In God we have placed our praise all the day, and your name we have acknowledged in every time and place. Selah. Yet you have rejected and shamed us, and you have not gone forth with our forces. You have turned us away from the oppressor, and those who hate us have hauled in plunder for themselves. You have given us over like sheep for devouring, and among foreign peoples you have scattered us. You have sold your people for no benefit, and you have not gained interest through their sale. You have made us a mockery to our neighbors. Those surrounding us disdain our labors. You have made us an epithet among the nations. They shake their heads that we are your creations. All day long my humiliation is before me, and my shame-filled face has enveloped me. Through the voice of the degrader and the taunter, through the face of the enemy and the one who seeks vengeance, all this has come upon us, yet we have not forgotten you, and we have not acted falsely in your covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor has our step turned aside from your path, for you have crushed us in a jackal's den and covered us with a shadow dark as death. If we had forgotten the name of our God or spread forth our hands to a strange God, would not God have investigated this? For you know the hidden matters of the heart. Yet for you we are killed all day long. We are seen as sheep for slaughter. Awake! Why are you asleep, Adonai? Wake up! Do not spurn us to eternity. Why have you hidden your face? You have forgotten our affliction, our oppression. For our being is bowed down to dust, to the dust. Our belly binds itself to the earth. Arise, be a help for us, and redeem us for the sake of your covenantal love.
Mm.
So, thoughts, reactions?
Hmm.
Mark.
Historically, where would the Israelites have been at this time when this was written, supposedly?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to know because we don't have any of the dates of the Psalms. But yeah, I mean my sense is that this psalm is probably later than the time of David. But I don't know that for sure. And certainly being called the sons of Korach uh, gives it possible earlier dating, like a traditional approach that this was actually written by the sons of that same Korach who was in the desert would say that these are very old psalms. But I don't think that that is historically accurate.
Because what I find interesting, the beginning of it, knowing that it was written by the sons of Korah kind of changes everything in my mind. My first thought was, they're looking at what God did for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and now they're in a different situation, and it's kind of like when you think of it, it's like where was God during the Holocaust, for example? Um, has God deserted us? And that seems to be the question they're asking.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that this psalm very much um relates to that kind of question. You know, all the bad stuff that has happened to the Jewish people over the centuries. Where's God? Where's God? It's not because the Jewish people, have rejected God. It's not because we stopped being Jewish. The psalmist says, no, we're like faithful. We kept our side of the covenant. What about you, God? Why didn't you go out to fight with our people? Certainly the imagery of sheep to slaughter that comes from this psalm uh, has been used in the context of the Holocaust. Other comments? Gary?
Most of the songs that we have read, when I read them, I see something sort of personal and domestic, but this one really seems to be mainly a national issue.
I noticed that too. This psalm is written almost exclusively in the plural. In the Hebrew, it is all us, ours, we, right? This person, the poet here, really sees themselves as representing the whole nation. The bad stuff that happened to the individual here is understood by that individual as having happened to the whole nation. Um, a- yeah, and unlike many of the Psalms where it's really about a personal enemies and personal destruction and personal ridicule, here it is the nation that is being uh, discarded by God, the nation that is being sold as slaves with no profit, the nation that is being that there's a failure of God to fight on behalf of the whole nation. I wonder if that also connects to Mark's feeling that this psalm raises up the Holocaust for him, because there's a way in which that the Holocaust is our generation's example of something that affects the entire Jewish people, the entire nation. Um, and so there's a way in which the totality of that connects to that to the public plurality, totality of this psalm, right? This is about the entire people. We heard from our ancestors that you used to help the Jewish people. We, the Jewish people, are now wondering why aren't you helping us? Yeah, it's very plural. Linda.
Me?
Oh yeah, I thought you just raised your hand.
Oh, no, 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 I'm taking notes. Slicha.
You didn't have something to say? Oh, Gary.
Yeah, I've sometimes made a division, at least just in my own mind, not because of anything I've read, that the great disasters, the Babylonian invasion, the Roman invasion, were all perceived as in response to sin. But the Holocaust, and here in this poem too, it doesn't seem to be perceived in that way.
All right.
Those earlier great disasters were seen as sort of their own fault. They did something wrong, that's why it's happened. But this poem sort of questions that, and I think the way we perceive the Holocaust also is not in that form.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, right? Our liturgy describes tragedy as, in some sense, um, based in a moral failure on the part of the people. That's what Gary is saying, right? The people sinned, and therefore there was a destruction, or there was an exile, or there was a pogrom, or whatever. And we, 21st century theologians, we're uncomfortable, a lot of us, with that theology because it feels like victim blaming. And we try hard not to blame the victim, right? If someone is raped, God forbid, we moderns, we're not supposed to say, oh, it's because she was wearing a short skirt. She was leading them on. Right? We're supposed to say rape is completely unacceptable. I mean, we're not just supposed to say that. We believe it, right? Rape is completely unacceptable. It doesn't matter what the actions of the victim are. A person should never be raped, period. Right? And I don't think it's been that long since that was the attitude, the public attitude. That is to say, even as a child, and even certainly when my parents were children, right? There was a general victim blaming that went on in the world, and certainly we saw in the Me Too movement that that's not completely over. Anyway, I bring this up because we are uncomfortable with a theology that blames the Jewish people for all of the bad stuff that happens to the Jewish people. And I think we're also uncomfortable with that in the context of history, because we didn't, in fact, historically cause all of the bad stuff to happen to us. Bad stuff just happened to us sometimes. Um, and we certainly want to blame the enemies of the Jewish people for that. I did experience a class several years back that suggested that one of the reasons why the Jewish people have lasted so long, whereas the Ammonite people no longer exist, and the Moabite people no longer exist, and the Hittite people no longer exists, and the ancient Babylonians no longer exist, and the ancient Assyrians no longer exist, that one of the reasons why that was the case was because of this theology that blamed the victim. Because a corollary to this theology is that God remains in relationship with the people no matter where they go, that God goes into exile with the people. The class suggested that in the ancient world, gods, whatever your god was connected to the land on which you lived and was only powerful insofar as it protected that land. And once a people was exiled from that land, they were no longer part of that people. They were no longer worshiping that God. They were no longer bound to that. But because of our theology, because of the Jewish people's theology, that exile was a result of sin, we were able, even in exile, to remain in relationship with God. It's a very interesting sort of positive spin, right? We say in our tefillot, Mipnei chataenu galinu me'artzenu. Because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. But we also then pray for a return to that land and for a return to God, right? We managed to, through that theology of exile and return, remain committed to the covenant, even though we were no longer landed. And the Assyrians disappeared when Assyria disappeared. The Hittites were no more when they were no longer connected to the land. And same with the Canaanites and the Jebusites and all of the other ancient peoples. They they lost, they were dispersed and didn't develop a theology of diaspora, a theology of exile. And the this idea of we we are in exile because of our sins is very much connected to that ability to continue to be in relationship with God. So I think there's a bad side and a good side to that theology. Gary is pointing out that that theology, which is in some ways a very dominant Jewish theology, present in prayer, present in how we tell our story, right? Present in some sense in the, you know, in the sort of the pattern that we have with regard to our holidays, right? They tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. They tried to kill us, they succeeded, let's fast. Right? The part of that is a repetition of that sort of, you know, ongoing uh tension with this sense of that sin causes our suffering. But this psalm and a few other places, represent a strong counter voice. The book of Job, I think, is another good example. There are other examples. Also, there are examples in our liturgy where we say, no, like we are not responsible for this thing that happened to us. God, you are responsible for it. You have abrogated the terms of our covenant, the deal, right? If we, we're supposed to not have bad things happen to us if we don't do bad stuff, which actually kind of, in some sense, reinforces the theology of uh it's still in the realm of the theology of bad stuff happens to us when we sin, but it's saying but not every bad thing that happens to the Jewish people is a result of the Jewish people's sin. Sometimes it just seems unconnected to that. And that is definitely a part of this psalm's voice. Murray, I saw your hand.
Well, I think based upon all the very erudite comments on the meaning of the psalm, one could see that it is a psalm for the ages. It is referred to the Libnei Korach, to the children of Korach, but it could be, let's say, analogized to the survivors. And the survivors, and we're going through all of the periods of ups and downs of the people, and it is a psalm for every age where it experiences let's say, what seems to be a perception of abandonment, and we are living through this right now. We have done for the last 80 or whatever it is number of years, and so it is ushers in, seems to me, a new era of relationship of God and the people who worship the God who look to the past but see a different present.
How beautiful, right? So I suggested at the beginning, maybe we can learn something from the fact that this is a psalm of the children of Korach and from the tone of it. And Murray is saying, yeah, the children of Korach were survivors of this destruction that Korach experienced. And maybe this psalm is a psalm of survival, a psalm of survival of the Jewish people in every generation, but starting from these first survivors who survived this swallowing up of the earth. Alba, you have to unmute.
Yeah. The more you guys talk, the more ideas come in my head. Then you talk some more, and I have to start canceling some of those ideas that come in my head. there were three that came into my head. Several years ago, here in Spain, there was a congress, a conference for all the leaders of all the different Jewish congregations throughout Europe. And here in Spain, the majority of um, the central, there's a very large population of Moroccan Jews. And the president got up and said categorically, the reason the Holocaust happened was because of the reform movement. If there hadn't been a reform movement, there wouldn't have been a Holocaust. Reform is sin, therefore. And it was like my eyes were this big, and this guy was going on. Okay, so this idea of blame somebody, you got to find somebody to blame. So let's blame the reform movement for all of this. The second thing that came into my head was that Babylonia, when they conquered some group of people, or Nineveh or the Persians or whoever back in the day, when they conquered a place, like you were saying, their particular religion was based upon a specific god in a specific place. And if you conquered them, you would take their god or their representation of their god and take it to Babylonia. And there was a museum there with all the different places that they had conquered. And in the museum, there were these gods that had been taken, but the only problem was the kingdom of Judah. There wasn't any god to take. I mean, like, I don't know, menorah and a couple of spoons. I mean, what do you take? Where's the god? And it's kind of interesting that, like you were saying, you have to go to a place for a certain or a geographical point or something to see this god controlling this area. Judaism doesn't have that. It's the text itself, and you can drag that anywhere you want to drag it. It's the God is incorporate. It doesn't exist. Exist like to touch it or something. It's just this idea. How do you kill an idea? So the last one and so when like Sirius, the Persian guy says, I'll give you all your stuff back from the museum. As far as that guy was concerned, it really didn't matter. There was no palpable God in there to give back. Just give him back the junk and let him go back to Jerusalem or whatever. And then I have a question. After all that noise, I have a question. And the question is, who used the idea of lambs to the slaughter to describe Jewish persons during the Holocaust? Some historian or some newspaper person had to have started this idea of lambs to the slaughter. And then I have noticed in the last like 15 years, there has been a very marked interest in changing that idea and saying, there were not lambs to the slaughter. There was the resistance. There was this, there was that. There are books being written now of how the girls in Warsaw worked in against the Nazis. They did what they could under the worst conditions. Trying to say that there's this kind of contest, the lambs to the slaughter versus no, there was resistance. So who started that? Who started this whole idea of lambs to the slaughter?
So I have an actual answer to that.
All right.
So first of all, the phrase refers to the idea that Jewish people went passively to their deaths. And in the Kishinev pogrom in 1903, after Kishinev, Chaim Nachman Bialik wrote two very important poems, City of Slaughter, and I forgot the name of the other one. Ir Hariga, that's the City of Slaughter. Anyway, his poem challenged the Jewish people to develop backbone and a fighting force, and not to go like lambs to the slaughter. And during the Holocaust itself, Jewish resistance leaders used the phrase as a way to exhort Jewish people not to be like that, but instead to fight back. After the Holocaust in Israel, part of why the Holocaust was so shameful to discuss in 1950s and 1960s Israel was because there was a broad cultural assumption that 6 million people couldn't have been killed without their tacit like without them going along with it. And so there was a myth that developed of that Jews had no resistance, that there was no, that they just went like lambs to the slaughter. There was also at the same time strong voices that pushed against that. But we know that Holocaust survivors didn't start talking about their experience in the war in this country or in Israel, but especially in Israel, for decades afterward. And a lot of it had to do with this myth. And when you say that there is like a concerted effort to criticize that myth, you are correct. Starting in the 80s, but especially in the last 2 decades, there has been a real prominent emphasis on overturning that aspect, that way of telling that story as a form of victim blaming, and to say no, it wasn't the victim's fault, and in fact there was a lot of a lot of um resistance. The biblical connections of this phrase are from the psalm that we're currently reading and from a chapter of the book of Isaiah, chapter 53. And so it's a very old idea, a biblical idea that was used in the 20th century both by Jewish people and by enemies of the Jewish people to describe the situation in the Holocaust. So that's my short version of that answer. You could take a whole semester long course on that. But I do think that it relates in some sense to the way the liturgical uses of this psalm in our tradition. So let's look at those. The liturgical uses of Psalm 44. So there aren't a ton, but there are some. The second half of verse 16, which says, Uvoshet Panai Kisatsni, right? The shame of our faces, or the shame of my face covers me, was paraphrased into the plural, Boshet Paninu Kisitanu, okay, and then was used by Rav Sadia Gaon, who Sadia Gaon was a very important teacher in Muslim the Abbasid Caliphate, a very important person who translated some of Muslim theology into Judaism. And Maimonides was very influenced by Sadia Gaon. You know that all of the Greek philosophers survived to today because they were translated into Arabic, and the Muslim world preserved the Greek philosophy. The Christian world was very against philosophy for a long time, and so that's like when you talk about the Dark Ages, or I understand that that's not the approved words anymore for talking about that part of history. Now you're supposed to say medieval Europe or something like that. But the Dark Ages, so called, are called that because the Christian Church was so profoundly against learning, and but in during that time, the Muslims uh, copied the texts of mathematics and philosophy and taught them. So uh, Saadia Gaon is living in that time and translates a lot of that stuff into Hebrew. Um, Maimonides is also, right, a neo-Aristotelian thinker who translates some of Aristotle's theology into Jewish, Aristotle's philosophy into Jewish terminology. Uh, but he wrote this poem for Erev Rosh Hashanah. We have sunk into muddy depths. There is no foothold. We have come into deep waters, and a whirlpool has swept us away. Not you, Adonai, our God, have we harmed, but only ourselves. Not you have we irritated, but only ourselves. For when man sins, what effect has it on God, on you? If a person's transgressions are numerous, what does it do to you? But woe to the people who sin against you, and woe to their souls, for they bring evil on themselves. Our God, we are too ashamed and disgraced to lift our faces to you. Our God, for we are like a repulsive vessel. Thus we are disgraced in our own eyes. A man immersed in a muddy ditch and soils his clothing. And as we were conceived in iniquity, so was the shame of our faces has covered us. And that's a quote from our psalm. Each day of Sukkot, in the morning prayers, we take up the lulav and etrog and march around the sanctuary, praying for God's deliverance. That's called the Hoshanot. Each day begins and ends the same, but it has its own Hoshana, its own alphabetical acrostic that prays for deliverance. And the one that starts O Mani Choma uses a phrase from our psalm, the phrase that we've been talking about, considered a lamb for slaughter, to refer to the Jewish people. And you can read the whole section. Hoshana, please save the nation standing steadfast as a solid wall, radiant as the sun, exiled and scattered, stalwart as a palm tree, martyring herself for you, considered a lamb for slaughter, dispersed among those who despised her, adoring you and clinging to you, bearing your yoke, singly proclaiming your uniqueness, oppressed in exile, learning to be in awe of you, struck on the cheek, handed over to those who beat her, suffering your trials, a ship caught in a storm, rescued by Moses, your sacred flock, the congregation of the people of Jacob, who bear your name, who cry, save us, and trust in you. Hoshana, please save us. So that phrase very much is connected to our prayers for deliverance on Sukkot. Then the other uses of this psalm are used in the context of a public fast day declared on the 20th of Sivan to remember the Khmelnytsky massacres, which happened in June in 1648, when Bogdan Khmelnytsky, who was an enemy of the crown of Poland, he was imprisoned by the king of Poland on the testimony of a Jewish person, because he was a traitor to the crown, and the Jewish person got wind of his being a traitor and testified against him to the crown of Poland. Now we now think of Poland as a place that is associated with Jewish death, but Poland, the Polish monarchy, actively invited Jewish people to come, and there's a 800-year history of Jewish people happily living in Poland and being very much protected and supported by the Polish monarchy. So there was always a close relationship between the Jewish people and the Polish monarchy, which I think contributed in some sense to the anti-Semitism in Poland among the common people, who saw Jews as simply the money collectors of the crown. In any case, Khmelnytsky, he was put in prison for being a traitor. And while he was waiting sentencing and death, the Polish king died. And Khmelnytsky escapes from prison in the political chaos which ensues and rounds up a whole bunch of Cossacks and fights the Polish army, beats the Polish army, the Polish crown, the monarchy, the army of the monarchy, using these like Russian Cossack mercenaries from Ukraine, and uh, and takes over the government of Poland. And because it was a Jewish person who testified against him, he he and his Cossacks kill. Some reports say as many as 500,000 Jews in Poland, though that seems like a high number to me. Definitely on the day of 10 June 1648, there's records that show that the entire Jewish community of Nemirov, 6,000 Jews, were killed on that day. And there were hundreds of small Jewish communities that were attacked by the Cossacks during this period, the Khmelnytsky massacres in the late 17th century. I don't know whether the total deaths reached 500,000, but I can say that the deaths in the Khmelnytsky massacres were the biggest deaths by pogrom in Poland until 1942, until the Holocaust. And many of the small communities declared minor fast days to honor the destruction of their community. The slaughter of 30% or whatever of their community's people, and the whole community of Poland observed until the Holocaust, observed the 20th of Sivan as a fast day to remember the massacre of the people of Nemirov, including Rabbi Yechiel Michel, who was one of the most famous rabbis of Poland of that time, and he wrote a book called the Shivrei Luchot. And one of the places where I found references to this psalm was in a poem that was written for that fast day, a special El Maleh prayer that was written for the 20th of Sivan to remember the massacre of the people of Nemirov, and especially Rabbi Yechiel Michel. And uh, it's an acrostic El Maleh. So El Maleh starts with an aleph, and this poem begins El Maleh, and it has a paragraph that's for aleph, and then each letter of the alphabet has another letter. And the ayin letter, the paragraph that begins with ayin, comes from verse 24 of our psalm, which asks God, "Why are you sleeping? Why aren't you helping? What is going on?" Um, and I think it's not an accident that verses 24 and 25 are used in a slichot prayer for the destruction of Polish Jewry in the Khmelnytsky massacres. It's not the destruction of Polish Jewry. There were plenty of Jews in Poland after that, but this like terrible pogrom in the late 17th century, the mid 17th century, of the Jews of that region. And I think that the reason why they went to this psalm is exactly what we've been talking about. That this psalm is a psalm about destructions that happen to the whole Jewish people, and destructions that don't seem to be related to sinfulness on the part of the people, but destructions that seem sort of arbitrary or unconnected to that general Jewish theology. Um, and so this psalm really speaks, I think, gives a voice to that passionate appeal. So Mark, when you said this reminds you of the Holocaust, in fact, you're not the first one to think that. Like that this psalm is used to remember the Khmelnytsky massacres. Like so 400 years ago, somebody also thought, oh yeah, Psalm 44 really feels like it connects to this moment of destruction. Yeah, Mark.
Get, excuse me. Getting back to what you said before about um, people leaving their land and leaving their gods behind, we kind of always taken God with us, so to speak, through
Right.
the desert in the ark, and in all our diasporas. God has always been a presence, which is kind of an interesting thing. While we have no physical God, God does seem to be a part of where we are at all times.
Right. Nice. Nice. Going into exile, we maintain our relationship with God. We take our God with us because God has no physical form, no idol that can be placed in a museum somewhere, right?
God is
We're
God is
able,
easy. God is easy to carry.
yeah, we're able to bring God in our hearts wherever we go. Yes, it's a very powerful portability. All right. Well, let's close with an approach to the spiritual applications of this psalm from Rabbi Richard Levy. And then, as I mentioned last week, we will not be meeting this coming Tuesday, the 26th of November, because I'm taking some time off for Thanksgiving. And I will be in visiting my parents-in-law in Havertown, Pennsylvania. So I won't be teaching the class next Tuesday, but we will meet in 2 weeks on the 3rd of December. All right. While many of the Psalms of pain could be offered by any religious person, this psalm clearly reflects the outpouring of an Israelite, or in subsequent ages, a Jew. It reminds us how deeply we are connected with the people that provide so much of our identity, that connects us to God through the covenant made at Sinai. When we pray to God of our own pain, this psalm reminds us that there is comfort in seeing our pain as part of the suffering that the entire people Israel has experienced. And as God has continually delivered the people, so will God deliver us. It is also a reminder that one can be a religious person and still feel anger toward those who have hurt us and express the desire that they will themselves suffer hurt, and that God's promise to protect us and punish those who have demeaned the Jewish people is still in force. Would it be better if we could rise above such tribal feelings and try to understand the motives of our oppressors, praying that God not avenge us, but help the oppressors overcome their destructive tendencies? Perhaps it would. But such sentiments are often those of people who have not themselves been oppressed, who have not been taunted and humiliated. A midrash sees the angels who wish to praise God on the shores of the Sea of Reeds being restrained by the Holy Blessed One. How can you sing my praise when my children are drowning? It is revealing that God did not rebuke the Israelites who were praising God, but rather the angels, underscoring that while it is human to rejoice in the defeat of those who wish to destroy us, it is also important to strive to reach beyond that emotion, that we may become more than merely human, fulfilling the description in Psalm 8, you have made human beings lack but a little of God. The poet here acts like a spokesperson for the people, challenging God on their behalf. Have we ever felt called to do that? It is the role Abraham played when he argued with God on behalf of the innocents he believed dwelt in Sodom. It is the role of someone who identifies his private suffering with the suffering of the people as a whole, and wishes to take what he has learned from his personal anguish to stand up for others who are in pain. And when he does so, his heart becomes lighter, and he breaks forth into song. All right. I hope you all have a really beautiful Thanksgiving. If you are coming to Shul this Shabbat, well, obviously I'll see you between now and then. There is a dinner from Athens to Istanbul this Friday night, so I hope come to the community dinner. But also, I hope you have a wonderful, beautiful Thanksgiving holiday if you celebrate Thanksgiving. And I'll see you December 3rd.
You too.
I'm really sorry I can't come to that dinner. I looked up all the recipes.
Yeah, it's going to be very delicious, I think.
Oh,
Thanks,
yeah.
Rabbi.
All right. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye,
Happy
everybody.
Thanksgiving.